My name is Kevin LaRue. I'm with SlickPic. I'm joined by my colleague Sam Burson, and of course our host Rick Hulbert, who's going to be showing us talking about the joy of symmetry in documenting and creatively reimagining the natural and constructed environments. And if that title doesn't pique your interest, you're probably not breathing. I mean, what a topic! I mean, symmetry is one of those things. If you know it, you know it, and if you don't, you're going to find out about it today. Rick's photography is informed by just a wide variety of experiences. He's been a professional architect and urban designer, seeking, I hope, to minimize traffic in highly congested cities. A musician, and of course he's taught photography through workshops and these kind of sessions for years and years, workshops in Europe and North America, etc. So today he's going to be talking about symmetry, as I said, in a wide variety of photographic genres. Doesn't matter what level of skill you think you're at, you're going to take something away from this. You can find out more about him at rickhulbertphotography.com. And with that said, I'd like to welcome you all to our session. And thanks, Rick, for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Good to see everybody. Thank you so much for logging in. I want to give special thanks to Kevin and, of course, Sam for inviting me in the first place. So there's no pressure on me, but I'm really pleased to be here. As Kevin kind of alluded to, I originally was educated in architecture. Actually, I was educated to be a professor of architectural design in a university setting. And, I thought I would be a better teacher if I then got some real world experience as an architect. So I tried that and it went better than I expected. What can I say? So for 4 decades, I practiced architecture. And actually, I retired about 12 years ago. And when I retired, I thought, well, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I'll teach again. But in this case, I decided to teach photography because I had enjoyed it since I was a young teenager. So now it's been, well, not to give away too much, I've enjoyed photography now for 6 decades. Um, and okay. Um, one of the one of the best benefits of being a teacher is that it is absolutely a great way to learn. It's one of the best ways to learn because you kind of have to stand up and talk about a subject and at least make it seem like you know what you're talking about. So I've done a lot of research on my topic today, and I'm gonna kind of mention how that came about. In the early part of the COVID years, around 2020, 2021, I was on a very short leash, and my wife would let me go out to the curb every week to take out the trash, but I had to come back in the house. So I thought, well, I got to do something. So I decided to go through my digital library that I had collected over time to see kind of the status of what I've been doing. Has it progressed? Has it changed? And believe it or not, I discovered something that I wasn't aware of. And that was that I discovered that I love symmetry. I know it sounds like, how could you not know that? But I'm being very open and straightforward. I really wasn't aware of how much I embrace symmetry. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and say a little prayer as I do this. Um, okay, I'm sharing my desktop now, so I'm going to go to. Look at that. Look at that. That's the title of my talk. I'm going to remove some of the images, some of the photos of you guys that are on the screen. And I'm going to hide the floating meeting controls, which actually I don't think you see, but okay. So I hope the title is long enough. Kevin mentioned it. There's a whole lot I want to talk about. I've got a lot of stuff to share. But it's not only documenting symmetry that exists in various subject matter, but it's also looking at potentially using it to creatively reimagine symmetry in both the natural and the constructed physical environment. Okay, so Symmetry. All right, I'm gonna quote or paraphrase a quote from a 19th century architect. Symmetry means, in the language of art, a similarity of opposite parts on the left of an axis of what is on the right. Okay, uh, there's the axis in this image, and the left half is essentially very similar, not identical, but very similar to the right half of the image. I'm inside a church in San Francisco. But when we say symmetry, we're talking about relative equality or geometric regularity. It can be mirrored, but it doesn't have to be mirrored symmetry to be classified as symmetry. Um, and as I like to say, because it's true, I'm actually my photography is really informed uh, um, from learning about artists and scientists. Okay, and that's how I'm going to approach this today. People who knew me when I was an architect see me and they say, what are you doing these days? And I don't say I'm a photographer because, like, who isn't a photographer? Everyone has a camera. What I say is I enrich people's lives through enhanced visual perception. So that is an elevator pitch, right? It's designed to get people to ask, well, what are you talking about? And then that's how the conversation would go. But as was mentioned, my photography is informed and inspired by the history of the two-dimensional arts of drawing and painting and the sciences of human vision. So I'm all about teaching. I'm all about education. I'm going to show you lots of photographs and lots of words, okay? I know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. You've probably heard that phrase. I actually think that a great phrase is worth 1,000 pictures. Please don't leave, okay? I promise I will show you lots of images, but I'm also going to use words because it's important, all right? Let's start with a quote from a physicist, Richard Feynman. Why should we be concerned with symmetry? In the first place, symmetry is fascinating to the human mind, and everyone likes objects or patterns that are in some way symmetrical. Symmetry is the one element above all else that the human eye finds most attractive. Yesterday, this image, it wasn't even in my presentation until last night. I was going through my emails and I got an email from Tomas, who is the founder and editor of Frames magazine. Some of you may know that journal or not, doesn't matter. The point is I looked at the image initially and I thought, well, that's really cool. And that's obviously symmetry, okay, with a central axis vertically in the image. But what intrigued me was his commentary, which in part said, quoting Tomas, I was in a rush. Something told me to stop, take a few steps back, pull out my iPhone, and take the photo. I liked it, but didn't think much about how people would react after seeing my social media feed. And the big quote is that they loved it. Okay. And now we're going to learn, as you've already had a taste, of why they loved it. So this is one of my photographs. This is in a city in British Columbia because I live in Vancouver. I live in Canada, and so I guess I could be called an expert from out of town. Okay, these are the Parliament buildings in British Columbia in a city called Victoria, the capital city of British Columbia. Take a look at this. What do you see? You see a central building, and then you see two buildings flanking it. This is a set piece. And you look at the landscaping. It's also symmetrical. It's missing a tree on the kind of right side of the image. And I'm not sure why that happened. It might have just passed away, right? But the point is, that's symmetry. I photographed this early in the morning, first light. That's a good time of day for me. And so is kind of dusk as well. So I came back in the same evening and made the same photograph using my tripod, so I know exactly where the camera was, the focal length, all that stuff, and I just made a second image. Again, symmetry, just a different time of day. But what I want to mention is that this is a genre of classically inspired architecture, which really emanated a long time ago, 5th century BC to the 3rd century AD. It was derived from Greek and Roman buildings. in this era, when it was built between 1895 and in 1950, this is called classical revival or neoclassical style of architecture. Very popular in civic and religious structures. It's formal, it's balanced, and of course, it's symmetrical. So let's go back a few centuries. I mean, here's a painting called The Delivery of the Keys to St. Peter in the 15th century. What do you have? Look, there's the central building flanked by two buildings. Again, a set piece. Now, in this case, also people. Now, people are interesting. If you have a bunch of people that are facing each other or not, that are identical, that could be an issue. We're going to talk about dealing with symmetry with people near the conclusion of my presentation this morning. But I just wanted to show you that. We'll go back even further. Let's go back to prehistoric cave painting. This is radial symmetry, which means there's a central point out of which there's identical elements coming from it. An easier way to see it would be in a more contemporary stained glass window. This is a window in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. National Cathedral. Radial symmetry. Symmetry actually automatically is order. According to the American scientist Alan Lightman, human brains actually strive to see things symmetrically. The reason must be partly psychological, he says. Symmetry represents order, and we crave order in this strange universe we find ourselves in. It helps us make sense of the world around us. Well, this is a photo I made in Cuba, okay, Old Havana. And I'm walking down the street and I see this gentleman sitting on the portion of the building, which itself is symmetrical. If you look at the tile placement, he's a little off center, but he is sitting in a very symmetrical position. Yes, his head is cocked to the right. He's got a cigarette in one hand, but that's still symmetry. Okay. Something about symmetry which is interesting. If you take a person's face, we think of a face as symmetrical, right? Two eyes, a nose, a mouth, two ears. You got the idea. But if I then take that, this is called bilateral symmetry. If I take it and I take the right half of his face and I make it symmetrical, or the left half of his face and make it symmetrical, people start to get a little weird looking, you know? So again, symmetry doesn't mean pure. This is where it's pure mirrored symmetry. There's a thought that's put forward by some that the more symmetrical a face, the more beautiful the perception. So I just decided to put a photo of Taylor Swift. I didn't take that photo. And that's not Taylor Swift on the right. That's somebody else. But if you look at how a human is structured, it's obviously very symmetrical in its structure. Okay. There's something called biophilia. This is the love or empathy with nature and all living things. Biophilia hypothesis proposes that our sensory systems developed heightened sensitivity to living and lifelike stimuli of the natural world. So let's start with a leaf. I mean, there are 155 types of maple leaves. Maple leaf is a symbol of Canada, so I thought I would use that. And yes, it's very symmetrical when you look at it, all right? Same with trees in general. That's a maple tree, and it too has a lot of notion of symmetry. Now, English garden, this is like super symmetrical, okay? Look at the plants, how the shapes of the plants, and of course, I could have stood anywhere, but I just, without really realizing, I thought, oh no, I'll stand on the axis of this walkway because I thought it kind of really told a story. And now I'm looking back and realizing, oh my gosh, I must just gravitate towards symmetry. This is actually called reflectional symmetry, where I got this out of a magazine, The Economist Today, and you can see the right half reflected in the glazing, the glass wall of the building on the left, and you end up with a symmetrical image. This is called translational symmetry, where you have the same element repeated over and over on a building facade. So these are windows, obviously. I'm walking down the street in Toronto. I see this and I just clicked because I thought it looked cool. And now I'm realizing, well, I didn't even know at the time that there was something called translational symmetry. But I'm telling you this because some of you might say, big deal. And some of you might think, oh, you might want to think about that as well in your own photography. Symmetry automatically means balance. Symmetry is one of the fundamental principles of Gestaltism, which is a human behavior theory that proposes that our mind naturally creates order and completeness in the things we see and encounter. And if someone was critiquing one of your image and was mentioning how, oh, it was so balanced, you get the idea. It's something that you just, people enjoy, whether they actually realize it or not. Whether you're balancing light or edges within an image or space, depth, tone, color, get the idea. There's so many things that can be balanced through symmetry. Symmetry. This quote here is, nature builds up her refined and invisible architecture with a delicacy eluding our conception, yet with a symmetry and beauty which we are never weary of admiring. This is a mathematician, okay? But it's in a garden in Vancouver. I walk in through the garden and I see this leaf. Oh my, that's a single leaf that kind of just naturally created this, I'll call it heart shape. And I thought, well, that's really cool. So again, I guess I'm thinking I'm enjoying symmetry, but wasn't thinking about it when I was making the photo. Well, here's a big picture. Maybe some of you have been in Arizona to Horseshoe Bend. You can pretty much stand all around, well, not totally around this object, but this giant rock. Well, I mean, to me, this was like the location to be for this photo. And look at it, it's symmetrical. It's featuring symmetry. How about trees? Well, I was in Yosemite National Park in, I think it was 2019, just pre-COVID. And I was impressed with the giant sequoia. The only way I could capture it is I couldn't stand back far enough to get it. Okay, so I used a fisheye lens to get that. And then I realized afterwards, oh my gosh, this was kind of cool. All these giant trees, and they're in a sense featuring symmetrically placed objects. In biology, there's a symmetry of form and proportion as in classical art. Nature favors the symmetrical, which is perhaps why symmetry is often something we find beautiful. So what I'm doing is I'm going through all the sciences, and you might say, well, this is supposed to be about photography, but no, it all makes sense when you realize how important human vision is, right? To our senses. So this is a Harvard mathematician saying this. This is one of my wildlife pictures. Now this is a photograph of a moth that's on a window of a building that's being demolished. It wasn't yet going to be under construction until they demolished the existing building, but I was going through it and I saw this moth on the outside of the glass, and I thought, oh, this is awesome. So I made a photograph of it. Now my mom is not alive anymore, but if she would have seen this photograph, she would have said, oh, Ricky, you should have cleaned the window first. No, no, no. All that stuff on the window, what I call chach, that is a word that I made up. But that word, that stuff on the window, that's great. That's part of, for me, the joy of this image, but it does feature symmetry. And of course, there's the axis, in this case of what's called bilateral symmetry. Now, in this case, I wanted to tell you that I donned my wetsuit and my lung and my goggles, and I went deep into the sea to catch this jellyfish. In fact, I'm at an aquarium, with my kids when they were younger, and this is in a glass box, basically. I walked up to the glass. Now, the secret is I have a rubber lens hood that I can put on the front of my lens. It costs, I think, like $9 at B&H. And I put it up to the glass so there's no reflections. And I get this scene, which is essentially, when I'm looking at it now, I'm thinking this object is, this animal is symmetrical. Symmetry automatically means aesthetics. Okay, it's an equation, right? Aesthetics is symmetry, elegance, and balance. That's a computer scientist, or excuse me, a computer artist saying that. A professor at University College in London says in physics, symmetry is a form of aesthetics. It's a form of beauty. This is a building also in Victoria, British Columbia, Royal National Theatre it's now an historic site. Yeah, I mean, that's symmetry. That's bang on, except for something called the sun, which in Vancouver we don't see that often, but I know what it looks like, a big ball of light in the sky, and it casts shadows, and the shadows aren't going to be symmetrical for the entire image, but that's like clouds in the sky. Certain aspects of symmetry doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical to be to be considered as symmetry. So I'm going to zoom in close because I want you to see the detail of how symmetrical this is, right down to each of the bricks, right? Like all the detailing around the windows. I like to photograph buildings that are disintegrating or so old that they're starting to, disintegrate. And I think in part that's because when I look in the mirror, that's what I see, okay, in my face, but I digress. But that's translational symmetry and bilateral symmetry in the same image, right? Translational, three windows, the same, repeated, and otherwise symmetry with respect to the overall image. So as Kevin alluded to, my background actually includes, I've been a musician. I studied art and architecture and urban design. I practiced those, I guess, arts and photography. But the reason I'm showing you this is because there's something very interesting about these 5 disciplines. They share a common language, okay? Think about it. Composition, color, harmony, contrast, rhythm, texture, balance, clarity, and of course, symmetry. So for some of you, when you, or many of you, if you look at your life history in terms of what you have been interested in, maybe it was a profession you enjoyed or a course that you took or arts that you practice, these same words will be there. And it's true of the sciences as well, which is really, really fascinating. I've been a SlickPic member for, I think, about 10 years. Sam can correct me if I'm wrong, but I went back in my emails, and I think that's when I first joined SlickPic. And I got to tell you, I've enjoyed the ride. It's been incredible. I have 25 albums, okay, all of which this entire website was put together by SlickPic. I had to do nothing, which is great because as much as I have to use the computer for photography and editing, I'm an old fart. Like I'm not really into a lot of technical stuff with a computer. So I really appreciated that help. And yeah, I just wanted to make a plug for them. They're great guys because you can actually talk to them directly. They're humans, and it's been a wonderful experience. So to continue, symmetry is automatically harmony. Harmony in art overall is achieved when the elements of an artwork come together in a unified way. Certain elements can be repeated, yet they still look and feel like they're lending themselves to a whole. Okay, this is the artist network quote. So just to continue with all the different subjects of symmetry, subject matter, this is the central span of a bridge in the province of Quebec in Canada. And I just was admiring it because I just thought it looked cool. And now I'm looking at it and thinking, holy cow, that's symmetry. And so I want to show that. Here's another, this is a humongous bridge in Lisbon, Portugal. Because the reason I get a lot of these photographs is because I've been giving workshops in Europe and in North America principally. But I'm looking at this, and so I decided, okay, I'm going to stand under this bridge. Now I'm looking at this, and I look at the religious sculpture on the left, upper left, that's symmetrical. I look at the man with his bicycle, and he's holding his iPhone or some kind of he's taking a picture of himself, right? A selfie. And he's in a symmetrical position. What I'm going to do, I think I can pan back now on this. Yeah, I'm going to pan back. Hopefully it's not too jerky in terms of the feed that I've got here. But that is some bridge. And I could have stood anywhere, which I did. I took pictures in all different locations, but I like this one the best. And again, it's featuring symmetry in kind of a grand scale. Symmetrical composition is intuitive and it's instinctive. We are hardwired to look at symmetry in art. It has to do with the way our brain processes information. Well, this is called horizontal line symmetry. I love cityscapes. And I love it when the water is very placid, all right? So there's a reflection. And, it doesn't have to be just buildings. I bet some of you really love landscapes, but the same is true in landscapes. This is in Antarctica. I went to Antarctica, unbelievable experience, kind of a once in a lifetime bucket list for me. And look at this. It happened to be a very peaceful day. I'm on a ship and look at that. I mean, I love it. I know that sounds arrogant to say I love my own images. The thing is that my mission is to try to get people to love their own images. That's all that matters. Don't worry about what other people say. I know it's easy to say, hard to stomach. You always, you're happy when somebody likes your work. But I'm suggesting especially if you want to be unique or if you want to produce something that's creative, just do things that you love yourself, okay? I'm going to talk about the universality of symmetry. Briefly, just bear with a few words. Humans, right? Flora, fauna, science, like physics, mathematics, as an example, geometry, psychology, neuroscience, sports, urban design, architecture, transportation, like trains, planes, automobiles, literature, pottery, carpets, quilts, music. All these disciplines feature symmetry. I don't know where you are right now. You're in a room somewhere, maybe, if you're indoors. If there's windows, if there's doors, if you're in the bathroom or in the kitchen preparing lunch, there's symmetry everywhere, okay? Seriously, when you start to realize it, you see it everywhere. So I'm going to show you something here. This is very personal with me, but in medical sciences, symmetry runs rampant in nature. Evolution tends towards symmetry because the instructions to produce symmetry are easier to embed in genetic code and follow because of its simplicity. So this is another physicist. Okay, I know I'm quoting a physicist, but here's the deal. I actually had an MRI, brain scan, just for you guys. Look, this is what I'm going through to try to give you a full meal deal here, okay? So if you see these three scans, one is of the upper brains through the upper brain stem. So I do have a brain, which was good to know. Then through my eye sockets, can you kind of see like a smiley face in the eye socket one? It makes me happy. And then on the right, I mean, I wrote happy face through my actual above my eyes, but it's kind of starting to look a little diabolical to me. I have to admit. The point is, folks, this is symmetry. Okay, symmetry's everywhere. Don't I did it through photography. If you get my drift. One more here on physics. This is an equation uh, from Einstein, Albert Einstein. You maybe heard of him. This is part of his general theory of relativity. Don't ask me in the chat what this equation means, okay? Because I do not know. The fact is, it's an equation, equal sides, okay? And I subscribe to a magazine called Symmetry. Now, before you go and subscribe to this magazine, I just want to tell you that I've been subscribing to it over a couple of years. I do not really understand any of the articles. I'm just being very open with you. But I might pick up an idea here or there, but sometimes that's what I look for in order to improve my photography. I'm studying subjects that most people don't think relate to photography. And then I cherry pick ideas and notions and then I apply them to my own chosen interests in photography. However, this I understand. Sports. This is a sports field. This is Camden Yards, home of the Baltimore Orioles. I could pick any stadium and it would be pretty much okay. So it's not that don't be upset if it's not your favorite team. But whether it's baseball, I wrote this down so I remember, football, soccer, basketball, rugby, tennis, ping pong, board games, hockey, most Olympic sports, they are on symmetrical fields, not downhill skiing, you know. Um, but when you think about it, and when you watch the Olympics, if you do this summer, you're going to see lots of symmetry, right? In how things are structured.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah,
would you consider the Olympic rings symmetrical?
yeah, yeah. I don't have them in front of me, but yes. Now it depends on, this is where what's in symmetry to portray something symmetrical, there needs to be a one or more axes. So that will definitely define it.
Hmm.
I hope that made sense, but I'll show you some examples. So yes, I would consider the Olympic rings symmetrical. I'm going to show you some architecture. Sorry, guys, that's my thing. Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. I gave a workshop in Berlin. I could have stood anywhere in this area. And of course, I decided I love the one that's looking down the throat of the boulevard that approaches this gate. And look at the chariot above with the four horses. I mean, this is symmetry. Uh, so I'm going to also use this for something else. Um, I can talk about literature, which you might think, whoa, literature, how does that work? Think of a photographic rhyme, which I made that up. But think of rhymes. You've heard of rhymes, right? A rhyme is a repetition of similar sounds, usually exactly the same sound, in the final stressed syllables or of two or more words. Most often, this kind of perfect rhyming is consciously used for artistic effect. But how about coming up with something called a photographic rhyme? This is a repetition. I made this up, okay? A photographic rhyme is a repetition of similar or identical natural or constructed objects or elements in the opposite portions of a photograph. Most often, this kind of symmetry is consciously used for artistic effect. Just something to think about. So I'm going to use the same Brandenburg gate to show you part of the piano keyboard to talk about music. where we have major and minor triads on the white piano keys, and they are symmetrical to the D key. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll show you a little more clearly here. That's a portion of a piano keyboard. You see the D key? This is an octave from A to G. And the D key is in the center, and it's symmetrical to the other keys. Whether it's sharps or flats, the black keys, or the white keys. So in music talk, we talk about pitch structure, scales, chords. Then I relate that to images that sing. I know you might think I'm nuts. I am a little crazy, but that helps in being an artist, okay? These are vibrations of strings and drums, and you see that they're full of symmetrical patterns. This is amazing to me too. Well, you just take a look at any of those square patterns and you'll see that there's symmetry of some sort. The universe is built on a plan, the profound symmetry of which is somehow present in the inner structure of our intellect. Now, this is highbrow, but this is a French poet, essayist, and philosopher. Again, a building. This is in Texas. This is, everything in Texas is supposed to be the biggest. This is the biggest state capitol in the United States. The only Capitol building that's bigger is in Washington, D.C. That's the national capital. But I photographed the exterior. This, by the way, this is built in 2 phases. 1888 is the phase we're looking at. And then I'm going to pull back and look at the 1993 edition. And just a little story here. The main Capitol building in the distance there, it's in a park. And the idea of the architect wasn't me. It's a great idea, though. They decided they want to keep the notion of the characteristics of open space. So they sunk the addition underground, and it gets its light through a big light well. Well, for me, that's where the picture is. So I wanted to position myself exactly on the axis, the vertical axis that runs through the dome, right down through the opening in the additional building below grade. And I photographed it at dusk, right? Dusk. And I used a tiny aperture, which I don't usually do, like 16 or 22, f22, so I could get what's called a starburst in the point light sources of the street lamps. And you probably know that, but that's a good way to get that kind of look if that's something you want. Okay. So I went inside before that last picture, just before they were closing, and I photographed the interior of the space. I wanted to get the dome from the underside. That dome, by the way, is 22 stories high. If it's a residential building, 22 stories high. Freaking way up in the air, okay? Well over 200 feet. I'm going to pull back and show you the whole image. So you see this building is symmetrical. Excuse me, what's so cool about this is that not only is the building symmetrical on the outside or the exterior, but also on the interior. Okay, so this is kind of the lobby. And because they were getting ready to close, there are very few people, which is kind of cool. It's funny about architecture, architects design for people and their activities. But when we photograph buildings, we don't like people in them because they mess up our buildings. I know that's crazy, but I'm just, again, sharing. Okay, so I went up to the mid-level because I wanted to try to get a piece of the floor and the ceiling. I couldn't do that. So I used my fisheye lens again, and I got this, which I was really excited about, because if you're photographing round objects with a fisheye, with a full frame fisheye, with a circular fisheye, that's a circular fisheye, it kind of works, in my opinion. Yes, it's distorted. I know it's distorted, but like everything's distorted, okay? The fact is that I used a picture I've made from the very center of the ground floor, that rotunda down below where the star is, looking straight up. I use it as a background. So I did a composite. So I have the circular fisheye overlaid on the composite, which I have on a black background, and I reduce the opacity by 50% or so, just to kind of fill the frame. That's the gist of it. I like photographs that fill the frame, especially if it's a projection. That's just me. Then I thought, well, yeah. So okay. I love cathedrals. Um, maybe because I can pray for good pictures. I don't know, but this is an amazing building. And you may wonder, well, what is symmetrical here? Well, it's the translational symmetry, right? Each level, let's start with the ground level. We've got those Gothic arches. They're repeated. Um, the next level up, we've got more arches. Again, the similar arches repeated. And then on the tower, they're repeated. Each one's different, but they're repeated horizontally, if that makes sense. This thing is 404 feet high. That means that's tall, really. That is like way up there. It's one of the only church spires of this size that's still standing in England, because they're made out of stone and they're like heavy, right? And they're collapsing under the weight. But you can see it took 100 years to build this thing. um, but that's a photo, and I wasn't thinking about symmetry, and I discovered the symmetry afterwards, but it wasn't traditional bilateral symmetry. That's what I wanted to show you. So I was anxious to get inside because, like, that's the magic. Like, this is incredible. Now I got to tell you a story, in all truthfulness, because I don't normally tell this part of the story, but I should tell you first of all that I'm standing by the font, um, and I was very close to it. In fact, I have an embarrassing part of the story is that I got so close to the font that my remote control cable was baptized. Luckily, it still worked afterwards, but what can I say? I treat it very carefully now, and I revere it. But what I also don't say is that there was a lot of construction going on in the right half of this nave. There was scaffolding over the whole thing. I didn't take a picture of the scaffolding. I don't know why. Well, I did. Sorry, I did take a picture. The truth is, I can't find it, which is embarrassing. But I just put this thing up just to show you. So it was terrible. But because it's designed to be a symmetrical church, you see, what I did was I took the left half and I mirrored it to the right, and I created symmetry. That was the beginning of my notion of composited symmetry. Okay, I'm going to zoom in and you'll see. I'll prove it to you. There's two pastors there. I pretend that they're twins and they're practicing their sermon to some other of the people in the church.